The first time the lander rattled, Santos glanced back at me. I tried to read his face through the helmet glass. Sweat along his upper lip, jaw tightening once, then going still. He braced one hand on the bulkhead and looked out again at the grey rock sliding past the window. I checked the acceleration readout on my wrist, within profile. The vibration came from the attitude thrusters working against the crater's lopsided gravity as we dropped. "Still you," Santos muttered. 2 fingers flicked in my direction, clipped but not unfriendly. "Crew headspace is yours, Pavel. You see anything I should worry about, you say it." "After we land," I answered. "My notes aren't running away." He snorted and turned back to the forward port. Outside, the crater floor rose toward us like frozen surf. The far side, a horizon with no blue disk to catch the eye, only black sky over stone. Behind him, Staff Sergeant Slate bounced one knee against his harness. His gaze moved between the numbers crawling on his wrist pad and the patch velcroed to the bulkhead. Joint insignia. NASA swoosh, Space Force Delta, a thin crescent for the moon, and beneath them the mission name in English and Russian. Bratstvo Recovery, Brotherhood. My palms rested on my thighs, fingers open, breathing steady. When I grew anxious, I had a habit of digging my nails into my hands until they left crescents. My skin stayed smooth, a small victory. On the audio loop, Houston Capcom spoke in slow Texas vowels. "Lander 2, you are go for final descent. We show you on profile. Autonomous guidance is green." A second voice rode over his, quick and clipped, the military cadence from our briefings. "Copy profile. Be advised, updated thermal imagery of target site indicates internal heat sources still active. Repeat, still active." Colonel Anders always found his way onto the loop. Santos frowned. "How active?" He kept his eyes on the window. "Localized. Pattern consistent with limited power distribution," Anders answered. "Not a full working station. Still, warm enough. Treat internal spaces as potentially occupied and contested until proven otherwise." Boris's voice came from the left couch. "That conflicts with the last orbital pass. Those maps show dead metal." When Boris spoke during critical phases, people listened. His Russian engineer's baritone turned every observation into a verdict. "New pass, new data," Anders replied. "Look, folks, probably residual heat from decaying batteries and your own descent profile. The orders don't change." He paused long enough to make sure the next part stuck. "Any biological presence is a security concern and a research asset. Treat it accordingly." Houston surfaced again, a fraction too late. "Lander 2, reminder you are under standard rescue and recovery protocols. Any human life encountered is to be prioritized over hardware retrieval." "Copy." Santos's shoulders lifted in a small, tired shrug. "We copy both." He didn't look at me. I knew the conversation waiting later, cornered in some corridor where he'd ask how far the words human life could stretch. For now, we fell through the last few hundred meters. A signal tone climbed in pitch as distance closed. My mind slid back to the archival film I'd watched before launch, in a quiet, windowless office in Houston. Grainy footage of Soviet engineers testing partial gravity rigs. Men in harnesses moving through narrow cylinders, learning to work where weight barely registered. In a few frames, my father appeared at the edge of the image, young and serious, pencil in his mouth. Always at the margin. Always about to turn away. The official story. Bratstvo, a hidden station on the far side, briefly used, then abandoned. Declassified diagrams, incomplete and contradictory. Russian archivists with thin smiles repeating there were no more files. The unofficial story, traded in graduate seminars and conference bars. Unauthorized human experiments. Long-duration isolation, psychological trials, maybe cloning. I had walked into this mission as the closest thing to a specialist. Psychiatrist, yes, but also historian of the early space age. The one who'd grown up with grandparents who still glanced over their shoulders when they told stories. The shuddering eased. The lander rotated and leveled. Dust rose in thick curtains as the thrusters carved furrows in the regolith. Contact. A dull thump came up through the chair into my spine. Lunar gravity pressed me into the harness with only a whisper more force than a Houston tram, but my body still filed it under down. "Touchdown," Boris murmured, peering through his side port. "We're on the floor of the great hiding place." Santos ran checklists with Houston. Systems, fuel, structure, all inside margins. I listened on autopilot. Attention tugged toward the other channel, the one that stayed off the main log. "Dr. Gray," Anders called. "You still with us?" "I'm here." "You understand the sensitivity of what we're stepping into. You've read the reports. You know how little anyone has on that place beyond rumors. I need your help keeping this from turning into someone's political theater." "Yes." "Good. Your evaluations will be the last word on the mental state of any survivors we find. You're more than a head shrinker here. You're the one whose classifications drive the decisions." "Does that register?" My tongue felt too big for a heartbeat, then settled. "It registers." He wanted reassurance that I'd write carefully, that I'd call madness what needed to be called madness, that I'd put certain words in the right boxes so later, when some committee convened, the institution could point and say, "See, we followed protocol." We cycled through depressurization and suit checks. Nothing glamorous. Procedures drilled in the water tank and mock-ups back on Earth. When the outer hatch finally opened, the air changed. The lander still held pressure, but beyond the thin metal skin, the universe went vacuum and stone in every direction. Santos went first, boots finding rungs one by one. Every motion belonged to someone who'd rehearsed past any urge to perform. "Surface looks clear," he reported. "No recent disturbance near the pad. No visible ejector from the base hatch." I followed. The regolith took my weight like powder over crust. Each step left a sharp-edged print that would wait there for the next mission or the next meteor. The crater walls rose around us, steep and jagged. The sky was a washed-out black, speckled with unwinking stars. Off where Earth would have hung on the near side, a pale planet glowed. Jupiter, probably. I didn't check. Ahead, half buried in the inner slope, Bratstvo hunched under shielding. To an untrained eye, it might have passed for a natural outcrop. To me, the lines of it snagged. Straight angles where rock liked curves, modules stacked in an arrangement that must have made sense on a Soviet drawing board. "Those cables weren't in the design," Boris said as he came up beside me. He pointed. Bundles of thick lines snaked out from one cluster of modules, ran along the surface, then dove back under the regolith. Soviet rubber insulation here, modern polymers there, improvised clamps where nothing had matched. "Improvisations," he went on. "Somebody kept patching with whatever they could reach." "Could be the Russians themselves decades ago," Slate offered. "Could be." Boris didn't sound convinced. We trudged towards the main access hatch, suits chattering telemetry. My heart rate held a steady plateau a little higher than resting. I blamed the suit. Working in one felt like moving inside a padded coffin at the bottom of a pool. Near the hatch, we found something missing from every diagram. A metal panel had been fixed over the old mission emblem, tilted slightly. Text covered it. Scratched, again and again, with whatever tool the writer had left. The handwriting staggered. Some letters straight, others shaking, some carved over previous strokes where the word had changed mid-thought. Russian, archaic, laced with bureaucratic phrasings and half-liturgical flourishes. I traced the lines with my helmet light. "The Third Covenant," I read, breath fogging my visor for a moment. "Await the judges who will descend from the betrayals." Santos's mouth quirked. "That's a hell of a checklist item." Boris leaned closer. "My grandfather after 3 glasses of vodka," he muttered. "Doctor," Anders cut in. "Interpretation? Whoever wrote this had time to turn their experience into doctrine," I said. They see themselves bound to some agreement, broken more than once. Or they're just nuts, Slate muttered. Delusion and system building get along very well. Santos set a gloved hand on the hatch handle. Whoever they are, they're on the other side of this. Let's stop guessing. He toggled the manual override. The hatch resisted a heartbeat, then swung inward. A metal corridor lay beyond. Ceiling and floor strips glowed in uneven ranks, some dead, some flickering between levels that made my eyes ache. Dust motes hung in the beams of our lights, each particle drifting in slow lunar gravity. Boris checked his wrist pad. Trace atmosphere only. Suits stay sealed, he said. Station air belongs to its owners. We moved in single file, Santos up front, Boris behind him with his checklist, then me, then Slate watching our rear. The writing hit me first. Every reachable surface carried marks. Carved, scratched, bolted on. Panels bore lists of names, dates, phrases. Some areas had been buffed smooth and overwritten. Drawings layered on drawings, a cosmonaut in a pressure suit, a launch tower, the outline of Earth scored across by a deep gouge. These walls follow a system, I murmured. Not random graffiti. You can psychoanalyze the interiors later, Santos said. Right now we make sure the floor holds. We pushed deeper, checking frames for corrosion or buckling. Reinforcement plates had been welded at odd angles. In other stretches, they'd stripped things to bare framework to feed repairs elsewhere. Life support's just barely in the green, Boris said at a junction. Whoever maintained this stretched it past sane margins. Anders, Santos called. It's still running. Thermal imagery was telling the truth. Understood. Keep me updated on any biological contact, and log every inscription, Doctor. I'm not a walking scanner, I breathed. I still lifted my wrist camera and took a shot of the nearest panel. Short lines, almost verse, written like bureaucracy. We are the brothers in orbit. We are the sons of failed launch. We are the keepers of the forgotten command. Dates sat beneath. Wrong dates. They refused to line up with any known flight timeline. Some looked like computations, others like codes. Behind a half-open hatch, we found the first pod. It lay at an angle, half buried in loops of cable and metal scrap. The transparent cover had fogged inside, but a human shape pressed up against it, thin body twisted by long confinement, head tilted at a stiff angle, nose nearly touching the plastic. Boris brushed rubble aside and brought his light close. This design belongs in a museum, he murmured. Early experimental biostasis, maybe. Someone's been carving on it. Numbers and symbols crawled over the pod's casing in ink and scratched lines. Arrows pointed to valves and ports with small notes. Use only after third cycle. Do not reconnect without confession. My gloved fingers hovered near one phrase. Rebirth chamber, I translated. They renamed their own hardware. Boris tapped the pod's monitor and coaxed it awake. A pale rectangle of light blinked on. Vitals present, he said after a few seconds. Weak, but there. We looped Houston in. Anders patched across almost immediately. Debate snapped into existence. Drag the pod out. Attempt revival here. Wake him at all. This is your lane, Doctor, Santos said, his eyes fixed on mine in the reflections. You know the limits on how long a mind survives in a box. Nobody really knows, I answered. Not at this scale. If we drag him, we stack more trauma on whatever's already there. Better we stabilize the pod and wake him in his own environment. Anders? Santos prompted. A pause. Do it, Anders ordered. Full recording, all of it. We cleared space, cut away scrap that would snag any movement. Boris pulled power from a dormant corridor to give the pod a steadier feed. Life support bars climbed from red to a dull amber. There, he muttered. If he's coming back, this is his window. No one had ever woken someone after this kind of sleep, not officially. I positioned myself where he'd see my face first. I wanted him to see skin, not mirror, but the suit stayed sealed. He would wake to a reflection. Better than emptiness. "Opening," Boris said. The pod's cover unsealed with a stubborn jerk. Cold air slid out, visible in the stir of dust. The man inside lay still for 3 breaths. Then one eyelid scraped open. Washed-out grey eyes, pupils jerking before they found my visor. It took him several seconds to pick my face out of the glare. He tried to inhale. Whatever had filled his lungs during stasis came out in a wet rattle. Boris leaned in, cleared his airway. The man's chest rose and fell in shallow waves. His gaze stayed locked on me. He tried again. The first word came as a rasp. The second carried shape. "Judge," he whispered. I leaned closer. "From Earth," he added. "At last." I didn't look at the wall camera. "I'm Pavel Gray," I said. "I'm a doctor. I'm here with an American-Russian mission to recover this station. We thought no one remained alive." He blinked slowly. "Of course you knew," he murmured. "You listened. You waited for us to finish eating our own." Behind me, Santos shifted his weight. "We have no record of contact," he said. The man ignored him. His gaze examined my face like a shape he recognized from a dream. "I remember you," he went on. "Not your exact face. The outline. The role. They preached about you. A judge born under our flag and claimed by the new empire, carrying both banners." "Doctor," Anders cut in. "Name and orientation. Theology later. My name is Pavel," I repeated more gently. "What's your name?" He wet his lips, tongue moving like a small, dry animal. "Nikolai," he whispered. "Nikolai Mikhailovich Korolev, commander of Bratstvo on launch day. 3rd generation, witness of the First Covenant, keeper of the seals." His eyes drifted to the pod walls and their scratched inscriptions. "How many of us remain?" he asked. "We don't know yet," I answered. "You're the first we've found." He grimaced, tugging at scar tissue etched along his jaw. "The Council sleeps," he breathed. "We sealed ourselves when the air thinned, and the transmissions from Earth turned into static and lies." He turned his head carefully to peer past me. "Bring me to the hall," he said. "If you're the judge, we don't waste words in corridors. Law belongs in its own room." Santos looked at me. Calculation moved behind his visor. Our first survivor, and he was already issuing orders built on his own framework. "If we follow his path, we learn more," I said on a private channel. "If we refuse, we start as enemies." "He already wrote us into that role," Slate muttered. "He still believes words shape outcomes," I replied. "Let's use that belief while it lasts." We rigged a stretcher and slid Nikolai onto it. His limbs moved strangely, joints bent by years of low gravity and confinement. Some muscles had withered, others overcompensated. Time had sculpted him into something optimized for corridors like these. His eyes stayed open as we carried him. He watched the walls, lips moving now and then, maybe counting inscriptions. He directed us along a route that split from our initial path, around blocked sections, through a maintenance shaft that brushed my shoulders, into a larger module whose dimensions matched old diagrams of a command room. The room had changed. Console banks, once meant for screens and controls, now lined up like pews. The 3 command chairs sat on a raised platform at one end, thrones built from hardware. Every surface wore text. Neat columns in some places, spirals around single phrases in others. In front of the chairs, a cleared patch of floor, a standing spot, a dock. We had walked into a court. Men waited around the room. Variations on Nikolai's frame, thin, bent in odd curves, hair sparse. Their flight suits carried patch on patch, repairs over repairs. Some wore badges I recognized from museums. Early cosmonaut wings, mission patches for flights that officially never happened. Their stares felt like measurements. Not predation. Assessment. Mechanics inspecting an unfamiliar machine. One stepped forward, dragging his left leg. His Russian carried a rural accent, corners softened by years away from home. "You woke the commander," he said. Good. The law moves again. He turned to Nikolai. Shall we convene, comrade? Nikolai's hand twitched. Put me in my chair, he answered. If Earth finally honors the third covenant, we won't keep the judge waiting. We looked at each other, then followed his instruction. We didn't understand the rules at first. Santos took place beside me in the open space at the center of the hall. Slate lingered half a step behind, hand close to his sidearm. Boris stayed near the door, gaze roaming over cable runs and supports like a musician listening to a retuned instrument. Nikolai sat in the raised central chair. The other surviving clones flanked him on lower seats. Their eyes tracked us but kept returning to Nikolai as if he connected them to something larger. We're convened, Nikolai announced. His voice had gained strength with height. Even half-crippled, he knew how to inhabit command. In attendance, the remnant of Bratstvo, the emissaries of Earth and the promised judge. He lifted his chin toward me. Name, origin, and allegiance for the record. As if this were an ordinary deposition. I'm Pavel Gray, I replied. Born in Moscow, emigrated to the United States as a child. My father worked in the Soviet space program. I'm a psychiatrist and historian assigned to this mission as mental health officer and consultant. Nikolai's lips curled. So they sent a bridge, 1 foot on each shore. That's the theory. And your allegiance, he pressed. I considered a lie. Allegiance for someone with my passport and accent lived in a grey band, not a flag. I serve the mission, I said, and the institutions that launched it, NASA and the United States Space Force. And truth? He asked. I try to serve that too. He laughed, harsh but genuine. You'll learn, Judge, he said. Truth in this hall depends on where you stand. He shifted his attention to Santos. State your purpose here. Santos straightened. We came to locate this station, assess its condition, and if possible, retrieve data and historical artifacts, he said. Survivors weren't on the manifest. And now that you've found us, one of the other clones asked, leaning forward. What's the plan? First, keep you alive, Santos answered. Medical checks, stable environment. Then we talk to our superiors and your government about what happens next. The clones murmured around the room at the word government. Repatriation echoed between them in Russian like a curse. Nikolai raised a hand. Silence fell. Repatriation to what? He asked. Which Earth? The one that launched us and erased our mission? Or the one that watched from across the ocean and stayed quiet? He glanced from Santos to me. We studied history, he went on. Decades watching your feeds seep through the rock. Flags changing, speeches, parades, no mention of us. An entire branch of the program vanished on the far side and no one spoke of it. So we made our own record. He gestured to the walls. You didn't come to rescue us, he said. You came to negotiate with an embarrassment, to decide how much of a crime can be buried and how much can be polished into brave experiment. He wasn't wrong. I could feel Anders listening on my audio link. Somewhere in Houston or Colorado, he leaned forward over a table and tallied phrases. Commander Korolev, I began carefully. Our records on this mission are fragmentary. We know a station existed here. The experimental parameters are incomplete. Secrecy at the time limits what anyone now knows. We're here to fill the gaps and to learn at least part of what happened. And to decide what story your Earth prefers, Nikolai replied. His gaze sharpened. We developed a procedure, he said. When one generation completes its trial, it judges the previous one. We record verdicts, archive testimony, and root power based on those decisions. Pods of those deemed unworthy lose power. Useful individuals stay connected or are copied forward. That cycle kept us alive. You set criteria while trapped in the system you're measuring, I said. Trauma shaping belief, belief shaping survival, survival shaping doctrine. Exactly. Satisfaction flickered in his tone. An instrument that tunes itself. The perfect test bed for the species your Earth abandoned here. He leaned in, voice gaining edge. You listened, he went on. Your probes visited. We intercepted some, read their codes. Machines came, looked at us, fell silent. You watched the experiment run. Now you've walked through the door. The trial extends to you. His thin hands spread. You stand in the defendant's circle, Judge, he finished. Not us. Behind me, Slate muttered, This is bullshit. Maybe, I replied quietly. They still hold the valves. Nikolai watched our side conversation with interest. You understand leverage at least, he observed. Commander, Santos cut in. Whatever your internal process, you don't have authority over us. We operate under international agreements. We came prepared to negotiate assistance and eventual transfer, but we aren't submitting to a court that exists only in your doctrine. You already walked into session, Nikolai replied. You revived me and entered this hall. The Third Covenant covers this. Any emissary from Earth who wakes the command generation commits to hear its case. He glanced toward the corridor behind us. You can walk out, he added, but only along the routes we keep intact. We know every conduit here. You do not. If you want your path home to remain stable, we talk. You listen. The judge rules. His eyes fixed on mine. You dreamed of this, he said. Back in your office reading fragments. You wanted to know what happened here and to be the one who gave it a frame. That's why they picked you. He wasn't wrong there either. The tour came after Houston finished arguing with itself over whether we were allowed to treat any of this like a trial. Learn everything you can, Anders concluded, but don't walk out with a story that says we recognized their court. I need something I can explain in briefings without needing a theology degree. Copy? Copy. Nikolai insisted I walk the station with one of his people. Not Santos, not Slate. Boris volunteered to tag along, engineering curiosity burning through caution. Our guide introduced himself as Mikhail. His beard had gone almost entirely white. His eyes hadn't. This module held your communications once, Boris said as we stepped into a high-ceilinged compartment. Hardware had been stripped from walls and reassembled into a tangle of cables and frames. You've turned it inside out. Transfiguration, Mikhail corrected. We turned it into the Covenant room. He gestured at the crude altar in the center. Dead monitors stacked into a pillar, metal plates leaned around it, all engraved. This is where we recorded the Second Covenant, he said. When we realized Earth no longer represented our destination, but our subject. I walked a slow circle around the altar. Some plates carried long narratives, others a few words. First generation, obedient and blind. Second generation, diligent and cautious. Third generation, fearful and inventive. Fourth generation. The line dissolved into scratched-out attempts and finally, a single conclusion. Discarded. These are verdicts, I said. Yes, Mikhail replied. Each generation stood here and weighed the previous one. Sometimes we granted partial stays. A few sleepers kept on minimal power. Memory fragments preserved. But eternal life devours energy. We rationed. And those decisions rewired the system, I said. He nodded toward overhead conduits. Power lines ran through the room in deliberate loops, through junction boxes that clearly hadn't started here. When we added a verdict to that plate, he said, we adjusted cables to match. The system and the law merged. Boris skimmed a junction with his fingertips. Ingenious, he muttered. And deranged. Derangement depends on surplus, Mikhail answered with a thin smile. We lacked that. We moved on. One module had been stripped down to ribs. Its floor was a patchwork of metal panels etched with text. Hydroponics once, Boris observed quietly. Lights, water, growth. They cannibalized it. For the rebirth chambers, Mikhail said. Greenhouses don't testify. People do. Another module served as dormitory for those awake. Narrow bunks stacked 3 high, curtains sewn from old parachute cloth. Small objects on shelves, a chess piece, a photograph of a rocket launch, a carved wooden bear, faces drawn on the walls, landscapes, a careful map of Earth's continents from orbit. "Who drew these?" I asked. "4th generation mostly," Mikhail said, "before we judged them." "What triggered that trial?" "They argued to go home without finishing the work," he replied. "They wanted to turn suffering into a plea instead of a tool. The council saw that as betrayal." I studied the map again, the familiar shapes traced in black lines. "Who wrote the word discarded under their entry?" I asked. Mikhail tilted his head. "3rd generation. They carried the first sense of abandonment. They believed harshness would impress whoever watched us from above." "Whoever," I echoed. He shrugged. "We didn't know which state kept the eye on us, or whether something else listened. We intercepted stray transmissions, saw fresh satellites cross. Someone watched. We performed accordingly." I thought of Anders, of NASA administrators, of politicians who'd paged through my reports. Was that any different? At a junction near the core, we stopped in front of a wall of names. Each name had dates scratched under it. Some sets were short, others spanned years. Brief notes followed in uneven script. Steadfast, ambitious, coward, blasphemer, repairman, prototype. Near the end, some entries had only a jagged line and a single word, dissolved. My glove traced one name. "Korolev, Nikolai Mikhailovich," I read. "3rd generation, witness, architect of covenant." "He judged himself," Mikhail said. "He insisted." "What verdict did he write?" "Witness," Mikhail replied. "He gave himself a role, not a sentence." Boris pointed at the marks labeled dissolved. "You disconnected these people," he said. "We shut down their pods and reused their organs," Mikhail answered bluntly. "Spare biomass was rare. One body can become many filters and culture media." I forced my feet to stay where they were. "None of this reached any archive," I said. "How would it?" Mikhail asked. "You don't bind your altars into your public budgets." When the moon rolled far enough for a clear line, we went to the interface room that served as our comms hub. The old Soviet transmitters slumped in their racks, quiet. Our suit antennas spoke to the lander, which spoke to the orbiter, which hurled our voices along a thin radio beam back to Earth. Santos and I stood close, helmets nearly touching. Slate took position near the hatch. Boris haunted the back of the room, half inside his own mental schematics. Houston took the status update with a mix of relief and static. Their questions clung to structures and radiation and consumables. The clones occupied a line item at the bottom. Then Anders came on. "You've gone poetic in the logs, Doctor," he said. "I need more than carved metal and doctrine." "I'm still parsing," I answered. "Their belief system is tangled up with their hardware." "Separate it," he snapped. "Here's what my side looks like. State wants to know if we're staring at a human rights mess that explodes on page 1. Defense wants to know about tech and data. NASA wants cooperation and closure. No one wants a lunar doctrinal commune with a grievance." "Too late for that," I murmured. "What?" "They're the outcome of an experiment that mixed isolation, cloning, and iterative self-government," I said. "They built a theology because their original mission left them nothing else. If we treat them as lab specimens again, we repeat the same pattern. And if we crown them a sovereign group with the right to demand trials and terms," he countered, "we walk into a legal swamp. Legally, they descended from cosmonauts whose status was murky before you even factor in cloning and doctrine. Some may be cognitively compromised. That's your job to determine." Paper rustled faintly on his end. "We dug up old KGB reports," he went on. "Rumors, partial notes on unauthorized cloning. If that becomes public, it squeezes more than Russia. We covered for some of it in side deals. Treaties built on mutual forgetting don't survive this kind of archaeology." So you'd prefer they vanish quietly, I said. I'd prefer we learn without minting martyrs, he replied. Your clinical labels become the foundation for everything. If you describe them as psychotic, cognitively unsalvageable, legally incapable of consent, that classification opens doors. For leaving them or harvesting them, I said. For doing what the larger picture requires, he answered. For keeping this from turning into a weapon in domestic politics, every faction will want its ghost cosmonauts. Houston's Capcom cut in. Doctor, we know this is an impossible situation. We're trying to act responsibly up here. Perspective defines that word, I answered before I could stop myself. Pavel, Anders warned. I drew a slow breath. I won't falsify their condition, I said. I recognize the weight on my phrasing. Good. Secondary instruction, he replied. Don't promise them anything binding. No guarantees of repatriation, no recognition of their court, no language that gives them sovereignty. Empathize all you want. Don't sign us up for cosmic guilt because of what your father did or didn't do. The shot landed clean. He'd read my old essays. Understood, I said. Static rose as the relay orbiter dipped toward the horizon. A few seconds, then silence. The line died. When I turned, Boris watched me. You're standing between courts, he said. Their hall and your committees. Home is a complicated word, I replied. Here it's the place that erased us, he said. There it's the place that will erase you when it's convenient. He bent over a panel. Write your own record, he added, before both sides decide what you thought. The sabotage grew out of fear. We'd seen enough to know the clones held every vital valve. They could starve us of air or slice power to our path back to the lander. That leverage hovered behind every conversation. Slate hated it. He cornered me in a junction after our third day of bad coexistence. His eyes were rimmed red behind the visor. We can't just keep letting them walk us through their choke points, he said. They control the routes. We step where they tell us. Any corridor can become a trap. We haven't seen overt hostility, I said. Their demands live in the moral register, for now. He shook his head. You heard what they did to their own, he said. They'll do worse to us once they decide the trial went against Earth. We need our own leverage. What are you planning? He glanced down the corridor, then back. Anders sent a command sequence, he said quietly. For a limited shutdown. We reroute power around some of their choke points, restore manual control to segments we can reach. Life support stays untouched. This just cuts their ability to lock us in or choke us. Where did Anders get that? I asked. Engineers modeled scenarios from the old diagrams, he said. It's not perfect, but it's something. If it fails, then we patch, he said. Between Boris and the locals, someone finds a workaround. You want to do this without telling them? He nodded. And without telling Santos? Security chain, he said. Some directives go directly through me. If they catch you, they'll read it as betrayal, I warned. They already balance everything on the idea that Earth plays dirty. They wrote us as traitors decades ago, he answered. Nothing I do improves that script. If Anders wanted brute force, he'd have sent more soldiers, I said. He sent you and me. That choice means something. So you play conscience, he shot back. That's your mandate. I play bastard when the job requires one. He moved off before I could assemble a better argument. I found Santos in an outer module and told him. He sagged against the wall. Of course, Anders slipped something like that into the pipe, he muttered. Stop him, I said. He rubbed his eyes. If I countermand a direct security directive, Anders marks me as unreliable, he said. Next promotion board, next mission, I vanish from the list. That matters less to me in the abstract than bringing you home, but it matters to the system. Whoever replaces me might be a lot more comfortable stepping over crew like you. I need to stay in rooms where these decisions happen. You're thinking about career ladders now. I stared at him. I'm thinking about who commands after this, he replied. If I become the example of what happens to officers who question security directives, that teaches the wrong lesson. So you'll let him do it? I won't endorse it, he said. I won't also tackle him in a hallway. What if someone dies? He met my gaze. Then we live with that, he answered quietly. Like every other cost in this business. The sequence triggered less than an hour later. I felt it as a dimming of the corridor lights. A subtle shift in the hum of machinery. My HUD flickered and corrected. Control anomalies, Boris called on the net. Power transfer in progress. I'm not seeing a local command source. I sprinted toward the junction where I'd last seen Slate. Training from neutral buoyancy tanks surfaced in odd flashes, smooth pushes, no wild lunges. On the moon, every step floated a little too long. I found him crouched by an open panel, knife in his gloved hand, cables splayed like exposed veins. Stop! I snapped. He looked up and then back to the bundle he was cutting. It's already moving, he said. Sequence is in the system. We just ride it out. Somewhere deeper, a relay slammed. The sound ran through metal like a dull impact. Lights flickered, returned at lower power. On the net, someone shouted in Russian. What was that? Santos demanded. Pressure loss in Corridor Delta, Boris answered. His breathing sounded fast. Doors are trying to seal. Where are you? I called. Static. Then. Main access route between sectors 3 and 4. The line cut. Boris? I tried again. Nothing. Coordinates? Santos pressed. I ran. A rough schematic floated on my HUD, assembled from our partial maps. The affected corridor looped around a bulkhead and linked 2 key sections, a junction we used daily and a storage module where Boris had been inventorying parts. Automatic doors along that path had tried to close. Some had succeeded. One had jammed halfway, warped by rubble. Frost traced the walls, a pattern of recent decompression. Wisps of torn insulation drifted, settling in slow arcs. Near the far end, a suit wedged against a bulkhead. Boris! I called, already knowing. He didn't move. Fractures spiderwebbed his visor. A residue of frozen air crystals clung to the jagged plastic. I still crossed the distance, still took his shoulders in my hands, shook once, twice. His eyes stared past me. His face had gone very smooth. Suit indicators lay dark. Behind me, someone drew a sharp breath. Mikhail stood in the blown corridor, feet planted, shoulders squared. His gaze took in Boris, then the torn open panel where the sequence had gone in. He stayed silent. He didn't need words. His eyes moved from the body to me, then out toward the invisible line leading back to Earth. So that's how you play this, that look said. So that's the weight of your covenants. Retaliation arrived with methodical calm. Nikolai summoned us back to the hall. We crossed the station like defendants. The clones packed the room in tighter ranks. Some new faces had joined, men fresh from long sleep, drawn by the scent of conflict. Nikolai's chair sat higher now, bolted onto an extra base, a small but telling adjustment. You spoke of peace, he began, of rescue and cooperation. You walked our corridors, read our walls, nodded with anthropologist faces, while you worked your knife into our wiring. He pointed at Slate. The sequence you used was clumsy, he said, built from ancient diagrams. It ignored decades of rewiring. Did you really think a printed page from your archive would outwit our lived improvisation? We didn't intend casualties, Slate answered. You aimed at control, Nikolai replied. The old empires repeat themselves. Damage counts only matter when they land on your side of the ledger. Our man died too, Santos put in. Boris was in that corridor. And we should feel comfort? Nikolai asked. He leaned forward. In our law, breaking covenant demands correction, he went on. We catalogued Earth's original abandonment as a distant event, recorded it, moved forward. You've just staged a smaller version here, deliberate and recent. He flicked his fingers. two of his men stepped forward with improvised weapons, gas-driven launchers designed to maim without punching holes in walls. In seconds, they had Santos and Slate by the arms, weapons resting against suit joints. "Enough," I said. I took a step into the open. "This doesn't correct anything," I told Nikolai. "It widens the tear. Killing them won't get you what you want." His mouth twitched. "You still think in terms of bargains," he said. "We lost interest in rescue and pity years ago. What we want sits on a different shelf." He took a breath. "We want a verdict that matches the scale of what was done here," he said. "Without it, we vanish as rumor, a line in a briefing. With it, someone has to look straight at what they built." He nodded towards Santos and Slate. "These two carry your mission's spine," he went on. "Remove them, and you leave a historian and a machine. You might survive to write a report. No one will read it without laughing. Institutions like yours bury uncomfortable narratives under the label of stress reaction. We know your habits." His gaze locked onto mine. "So here's the offer," he said. "We wait one full rotation of your Earth. In that span, you study the core archive. You read our covenants, verdicts, names. At the end, you write a verdict of your own. You inscribe it into our system and broadcast it to Earth. Then we choose the fate of your comrades. And our own." "And if I refuse?" I asked. "Then their blood satisfies part of the imbalance and you fly home alone," he said. "You tell your people they threw away their last chance to face this." He jerked his chin at the men holding my crewmates. "Take them to holding," he ordered. "No injuries yet. They're ballast on the scale." Santos met my eyes for a blink as they dragged him away. Anger sat there, and acceptance. He'd known the moment he allowed the sequence that this slope was slick. The hatch sealed. The room shrank. Nikolai sagged back in his chair. "Judge," he murmured. "Come, I'll show you the core. You can't weigh us without seeing where the wires run." The core archive didn't look like any clean, white server room. It felt like crawling into the skull of a very old machine. Racks of hardware from different decades clustered close. Tape drives hunkered beside bolted-on solid-state modules. Cable bundles looped between them like nerves, squeezing through cannibalized junction boxes. In the middle stood a pedestal with a flat metal plate on top. Columns of engraving covered the plate. Hand-cut lines, compact and neat. "This is our tablet," Nikolai said. "We carve verdicts here. Then we scan them and feed the patterns into the control banks." The mapping took time. He shuffled between racks, fingers gliding over familiar corners. "When we write dissolved next to a name," he said, "flags trip in the pod matrix. When power reallocation runs, those circuits starve. When we write preserved, different branches hold that pod on a trickle." He tapped a junction. "Crude, but it works," he said. "We turn the station into a courtroom. Every switch carries a piece of judgment." I stepped up to the plate. The last lines squeezed into the margin. "Sixth generation, fragmented. Bookkeepers and cowards, seventh generation, still in progress." Beneath them a blank space waited. My finger traced it. "This is where my words land," I said. "Yes." His voice softened. "Your verdict doesn't stay symbolic. It pulls current. It will choose which pods stay lit." "You're asking me to sentence people to death," I said. "We're asking you to admit that death has always moved through this system," he replied, "and that Earth's hands built the first relays." "Anders," I whispered on the private channel. "You hearing this?" "I hear," he answered. His tone had gone flat. "We think we can use that same mapping from our end." "What do you mean?" "Our technical staff pulled your last telemetry," he said. "We see how their engraving plate ties into the matrix. Once your team's clear, we can push a shutdown command along those paths." "Shutdown," I repeated. "Controlled cut to the station," he said. "No more clones, no more doctrinal OS, just a Soviet relic and a joint mission success slide." "You're talking about execution." "I'm talking about containment," he said. "We can't sustain them. Leaving an ungoverned pocket of experimental humans on the far side is a strategic nightmare, the sort that keeps certain offices awake. Nikolai watched my face. He couldn't hear the words, but he knew the pattern. "The other court deliberates," he murmured. "What exactly do you want from me?" I asked Anders. "Use their own system," he said. "You're standing on the plate. If that engraving surface feeds control codes, we can embed a shutdown sequence in whatever you write. Our engineers will give you phrasing that matches their doctrine and trips the right flags. They'll think you're honoring ritual. Meanwhile, you're ending it. With no survivors," I said. "With no loose ends," he answered. "I'm not a hired killer. You're the tool this situation hands us. You knew that when you signed. We cleared you because of who your father was and who you became. Don't pretend you didn't want a hand in this." The hook went in again. "Unfair," I said. "Survival doesn't grade on fairness," he replied. "Do this for your crewmates if the abstract doesn't sway you. You like Santos, even that stubborn bastard Slate. If this spreads, the first reputations on the chopping block will be yours and mine." I looked down at the plate. "You wired this with your own blood," I told Nikolai. "That's right," he said. "And each verdict felt necessary at the time," I said. "I believed it kept us moving," he replied. "Ever doubt?" I asked. He thought. "In dreams," he said. "I'd see Earth at launch, bright, full, then wake back here in the shadow of decisions we never joined. Doubt during waking hours would have dissolved us." I touched the metal again. "Mikhail showed me a clause," I said. "In your engravings. External review. A judge from outside the cycle writes a verdict that later councils can't overturn." A small spark flickered in his eyes. "You read the footnotes," he said. "It states that executions require that external verdict," I went on, "and that once inscribed, it binds even the current council." "You quote it well," he said. "If I hold the stylus, you can't carry out any new killings until I write," I said. "Your law holds you at your own throat." He studied me. "You hunt loopholes like a lawyer," he said. "Your father might have been disappointed." "He drew diagrams," I answered. "I read small print." He smiled without barbs. "You're using our own rule to freeze our hand," he said. "That clause came from early fear of ourselves. It still chains us. So Santos and Slate stay breathing until I rule," I said. "That's true. Then give me time. Your archive runs deep. If you want a verdict that anchors, it needs more than a deadline and a gun. The weapons already touch armor," he answered. "But I won't fire them yet." He nodded toward a terminal. "Start reading," he said. "We have history to get through before you carve your line." I read until text blurred. The archive held more than doctrine. Logs, personal notes, technical reports, some in careful engineer's script, others in hurried scrawl. Old tape, newer storage. As material ran short, they'd overwritten chatter and preserved only what the council considered vital. The first generation wrote with optimism, grand, secret, historic. The second wrote confusion as relief crews failed to appear. The third wrote fury when they realized Earth's political winds had shifted and their existence had become inconvenient. The first clone trial read like a bureaucratic memo. Subject: Korolev, Nikolai Mikhailovich, Mark I. Charge: unauthorized stasis cycle alteration. Verdict: useful, unstable. Copy forward with modifications. Original to be dissolved after successful transfer. Technical adjustments and moral sentences intertwined quickly. By the fifth generation, the language changed. Less engineer, more preacher. Trial of flesh. Sacrament of rerouting. Decompression incidents became offerings. Underneath the ritual foam sat familiar mechanics. Men trying to assign meaning to survival choices. I found notes on probes they intercepted. Small robotic landers sent into this crater. They disassembled some, catalogued serial numbers as trophies under the heading Spies. Two short transcripts documented radio contact with a crewed mission from another country, one the world never heard about. Halting exchanges, warnings, attempted bargains, a quiet loss of signal. They titled that episode The Second Severing. Near the end, I found a file tagged with my own name. A recording had been scraped from some public feed, a lecture I'd given years earlier at a Texas university. In it, my younger voice talked about early space medicine, non-consensual trials, how both superpowers treated test subjects. I called for a full accounting. The clip cut off mid-line, but beneath it the clones had written, "Possible sign. The judge speaks from the new empire's capital. His words reach us. Wait." I leaned back from the console, cold down my spine. "So that's how you knew me," I said. Nikolai had drifted into a doze against a rack. He opened his eyes. "You've always been in the script," he said. "We watched your name climb through papers and conferences. We knew eventually you'd come or send someone like you. The only question was whether our circuits would still carry current. You bent your doctrine around that hope," I said. "We built it into the frame," he replied. "And now both your Hall and my Earth want a verdict that kills somebody," I said. "Welcome to command." Judgment Day arrived without fanfare. Exhaustion sat in my bones. My eyes felt full of grit. The engraving plate gleamed, surface cleared for a fresh column. The stylus beside it looked like a simple tool. It might as well have been a key. Anders came on the line, voice almost gentle. "Our engineers drafted phrase patterns," he said. "The system reads certain formulas as flags for withdrawing power from sections. You'll need to slip them into doctrinal language so their people accept it, and their parser converts it." He read the phrases. To an outsider, they'd sound like dense ritual. I had read enough to recognize the shapes. Their doctrine had become a programming language. "You're asking me to declare parts of the station unsalvageable and others quarantined," I said. "We're asking you to mark this construct as unfit for continued operation. In their terms, you can preserve the archive. That data might help us, but end the living experiment." "And Santos and Slate?" I asked. "Tie their survival to the verdict. Tell the clones that sparing them completes the correction. Your words carry weight there." I turned to Nikolai. "You can feel the other court listening," I told him. "Of course. We wired this theater expecting 2 audiences. If I write so that power drains from certain branches, people die," I said. "Slowly in some cases. That's been true every time we carved here," he replied. "You carry the stylus now. I carried it before you. This difference is one of accent, not nature. If you preserve the archive and some pods in the deepest section, our story outlives the bodies." He lifted one shoulder. "You spent your career chasing buried stories," he said. "Now you can save one, or smother it." "You're using that against me," I said. "Of course. We work with the tools on hand." We weighed each other. "Can you live with leaving us to fade in the dark with no memory surviving?" he asked. "With taking a place in the same line of men who turned away? And can you live with me killing portions of your people to save others, including mine?" I asked. "I've made worse exchanges." My hand closed on the stylus. I bent over the plate. The Russian came without strain, a different register than I used on Earth, closer to my grandparents' kitchen. I named Bratstvo as the outcome of criminal experimentation and acknowledged the agency of its inhabitants. I described their mental state as altered by long isolation, trauma, and doctrinal feedback, a phrase broad enough to carry pity and alarm. I wrote that the outer modules had become corrupted beyond safe use and would fall into silence. The core archive, and a cluster of pods in the deepest, most shielded section, I marked as sealed and sustained as witness. Instead of the word dissolved, I chose their term for setting something aside for a later court. As I carved, sensors beneath the plate read pressure and stroke. Somewhere in the banks, tables updated. Certain branches flagged for shutdown, others for minimal continuity. The station's body absorbed the verdict. When I straightened, the stylus tip had blunted. Nikolai leaned over the plate and read every line, lips moving. "You left a remnant," he said. "You taught me that pattern," I replied. "You never erased yourselves entirely. You pruned." He let out a dry sound that might have been a laugh. "You followed the form," he said. "You honored the archive. You also carved a path home for your crew." He looked up. "You arranged your language like a mirror. Your Earth reads one reflection. We read another." "Nothing in that text is false," I said. "Placement does the rest." He smiled faintly. "You belong to our experiment more than you think." He leaned back against the rack, suddenly old. "Go. Take your commander. We'll keep the route clear." "And the broadcast?" I asked. "My verdict to Earth." "Send it. How your committees twist it is their theatre." The walk back threaded through a different station. Some corridors had darkened. Doors that once hissed aside now stayed stiff in their frames. Air moved a little slower in places. I didn't let myself imagine faces in every darkened module. The holding room door opened as we approached. Santos and Slate sat on opposite bunks in shirt sleeves, suits folded nearby. A single clone stood guard, weapon across his knees. He rose when he saw me. "Done?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "You'll feel the changes as circuits settle." He gave a single nod and stepped aside. Santos stood. "Well?" he asked. "Do we walk or do we stay for sentencing?" "You're free to return to the lander," I said. "They won't block us." "What did you write?" Slate asked. "I gave them a verdict. Power shifts away from some of their structure and keeps a core alive. Enough to weaken their grip. Not enough to erase them." "So you split the difference," Santos said. "I cut where I had to." "Anders will hate that," Slate muttered. "He's welcome to visit and carve his own line," I said, "from an actual chair in that hall." We suited up in the cramped room, checking each other's seals. The clones watched. In the main corridor, Nikolai waited, steadying himself against the wall. The light had faded slightly. His section sat on reduced power. He looked unsurprised. "We'll sleep," he said. "Those of us tied to the core circuits. We'll wait for whoever follows you. Your children. Someone else's." "You won't try to stop us?" I asked. He shook his head. "The verdict exists. The law moves. Dragging you back now would turn me into the one who breaks it." He pushed himself upright. "Tell your Earth we kept faith," he said. "We followed the mission no one had the courage to cancel." "I'll tell them." He studied my face one last time. "Your father traced lines on paper. You rewired a station with sentences. He'd stare at you and see another engineer." He turned and limped toward the deep modules where the preserved pods waited. We let him go. The lander waited on the crater floor like a silver insect caught in shadow nets. Our footprints formed a ragged trail back to it, crossing and recrossing earlier paths. Dust remembered everything. Inside, the air felt heavier than the station's. Familiar panels and straps grounded more than any therapy script. We strapped in. The ascent sequence ran itself. Engines lit. The lander shook and rose, leaving Bratstvo crouched under its hill of stone. Through the port, the crater shrank. The cluster of modules turned into a smudge, then into a patch of darkness in a field of grey. "Doctor!" Anders came over the loop. "Status?" "We're away," I said. 2 crew plus security. Boris is dead." "Understood," he said. "Condition of the station?" "Operating in reduced form," I said. "Outer modules will fail over time. Core archive and some pods remain powered. My written verdict sits in their system and in our transmission buffer." "You ignored the full shutdown instruction," he said. "I applied part of it. The station's compromised. Your risk shrank. The people inside didn't vanish entirely. You've placed yourself in a lively debate," he said. "Some reviewers will call this moral weakness. Others will call it risk management. Either way, you've forced them to read more than my memo. That was deliberate, I said. Santos glanced at me, then at the panel. You planning to court-martial him on the ride home, Colonel? He asked. Not today, Anders said. Today I want you under gravity again. After that we'll see who gets invited into which rooms. He cleared his throat. Dr. Gray, he added, you'll prepare 2 reports. One for Black Archive, one for eventual release. You know the difference. I do, I said. And your conscience? He asked. Where does that report lay? I looked out at the retreating lunar horizon. In a separate file, I said. The official debrief met in a windowless room in Houston. Cool air, polished table, comfortable chairs. The walls carried the usual framed mythology, rockets in flame, smiling astronauts, Earth suspended over lunar soil. My report scrolled on the main screen while committee members read, some silent, some scribbling, a few frowning at phrases. In the public-facing version, Bratstvo appeared as an unauthorized Soviet-era experimental facility. Its inhabitants showed severe cognitive alteration from prolonged isolation and self-reinforcing doctrine. I acknowledged their suffering and raised questions about their capacity for informed consent. I noted that residual power supported a small number of biostasis pods and an archival core. I recommended no further crude contact until a policy framework existed. That phrase meant delay until everyone in that room retired or died. In the classified annex, my language shifted. I described the engraving plate and its mapping into the control matrix. I detailed the doctrine turned OS. I translated sections of their covenants and verdicts and their notes about me. I pointed out the echoes between their council and our committees. I did not soften Boris's death. I named Slate's sabotage and Anders's directive. I logged every pressure that pushed my choices. Near the end I wrote, "The court at Bratstvo extends our own." The experiment persisted long after the station disappeared from public record. It continues in how we handle both the survivors and their narrative. Every deletion, redaction, and spin routes power through larger systems. We inherit a decision made decades ago, that certain lives can be converted into data and archived whenever convenient. I do not recommend further experiments of this type. Weeks later, alone in my apartment, I opened a different file. Before leaving Bratstvo, I had copied as much of their doctrine as storage allowed onto a secure drive, tucked inside metadata of innocuous mission photos. No one had noticed. They were too busy arguing about the visible text. Now their lines filled my home screen. Names, dates, verdicts. I began to translate into something truer to their voice. Under each generation's verdict I wrote notes, context, Earthside events from the same years. I traced the evolution of their terms, how a technical descriptor picked up moral weight, then ritual ring. As I worked, I recognized the pattern. They turned events into sentences, sentences into structure, structure into commands. I was doing the same thing, only my relays lived in human heads, not junction boxes. Whoever read this archive later would decide what to believe. That decision would route power through some system I'd never see. I couldn't bring Boris back. I couldn't rebuild the bodies reduced to filters in Bratstvo's corridors. I couldn't erase the shutdown command still sitting in somewhere like Anders' safe, ready for a future mission less scrupulous than ours. I could make the story harder to erase. Outside, Texas night hummed with insects. Somewhere beyond the black, the moon rolled on, showing different faces to different watchers. In a crater on its far side, under rock shaped to look like ordinary terrain, a cluster of pods rested in the dark. Some lights still burned. A few circuits still carried current. A handful of men, or versions of men, slept in artificial stillness, brains full of doctrine and dreams. They had never been simple heroes or simple monsters. They were men trapped inside a machine that valued what they could prove more than who they were. So was I. I saved the file, printed one hard copy on archival paper, and slid it into a plain envelope. On the front, I wrote a title in careful Russian script, Bratstvo, Testimony. No one else knew the envelope existed. Someday someone would open it. They would read the names, the verdicts, the covenants. They might call me coward. They might call me traitor. They might call me witness. Their label would land wherever it landed. The court would move on.